We're having today an Amiga 1200. This one's come in for a full recap, HDMI mod, an external GoTech, some BIOS upgrades and more. I absolutely love the Amiga 600 and 500, and I've got a 1200 myself that I still need to do up, probably to a very similar spec as this one. And here is the customer's console. We can see currently it does work, so it's not needing in repair other than some audio issue. It's the 1200 model, which come out after the 500, and I believe at maybe the same time as the 600. And for this one, the customer's paid for having all the critical ICs, putting heat sinks on them, a full recap, an external GoTech, so we can keep the original floppy drive intact and load off floppy disks, but also have a GoTech on the outside for loading off SD. Taking a look inside, we can see this rather creative way of putting an internal compact flash in. It's literally just in a grip seal bag. The customer has an 8MB expansion, but they've also paid for a Pi Storm, so this can go. With the board completely removed from the shell, we definitely need to do the recap first. We can see clear bulging of capacitors there. We've got, see this green? This is how you tell when they're leaking. So the solder's gone very dull and green, and it should be shiny, like these resistors here, out the way of any kind of leak. And if you compare that to that, you can see there's clear evidence of leakage. And here's clear evidence of where the electrolyte from these capacitors really does start to damage the board. So this is the kind of thing you prevent by swapping the capacitors. Then just look at the amount of damage just 2 leaking capacitors has caused there. And that's what it now looks like, all prepared for new components. It takes a lot of work to get it back to that stage. Hot air, steel brushes, anti-static brushes, flux, desolder wick. So once the capacitors leak, it's really much more work to get it back to ready to work on. That's what it looks like with everything now reinstalled. We've put ceramics where we can because they'll never leak and cause this issue again, and if you know what you're doing, you can work that out. We'll now do it on all the other capacitors, and with all the old capacitors off and new ones everywhere, it's time to move on to the thermal heat sinks. For that, I'm going to use my thermal heatsink kit that I've made, and all the critical ones are the rectangles, basically, on the Amiga, so we will heatsink all of those. And that's all them now protected and keeping them running nice and cool. For the HDMI output on the 1200, instead of using the RGB to HDMI or an internal mod, it's much better to use an OSSC. You retain the audio and you get the most sharpness by far. The customer's happy with this, so you'll get a setup where we have the RGB cable and an OSSC ready to go, so they can use RGB or HDMI. And I think the final steps is to install the Pi Storm. So this is the Pi Storm for the 1200, it goes in here, and then we need to configure all of the SD card and software side. For the GoTech, because the customer's using the Pi Storm and having WHDLoad games on, I've recommended we refund that. I also just happened to notice here, he mentioned that it was told it was recapped last year. It definitely wasn't. This has never been recapped. With the SD card now all set up and on, if we just turn on, and there we go. We're now in Kickstart 3.2, and it's time to service the floppy drive. So in order to do that, we want to demagnetize the head under here. We want to clean these pins, and we want to realign the servo here until we get successful reads of floppy disks. So that's the head demagnetized with this tool here. All of the dust removed and the pickups cleaned, and we've tuned the back drive. So now let's just see if we get a successful read, and if it's going to work well, this should load pretty fast, which it does. And then this asks us for floppy disks here, just because this is a game that will then write data to 4 floppy disks. We should get a prompt in a second asking us to insert a disk, and then we know the drive's good. We can test it on a load more floppies after, real and copies, but that looks like it's loaded fine. And the last step now is to just use a GoTech to install Workbench 3.2. And the final step for the customer is putting some games on here. So we'll go into data, and this is a compact flash I've got here loaded with games. And we just go to WHDLoad, where I've put them, and games. You can see we've got some here. The first step is to go into work, and I've made a folder here called games. So this is on the actual hard drive, and you can see I've already copied over one rough and tumble. So let's just copy over Secrets of Monkey Island from the compact flash. This takes just a few seconds. I've set the system up for WHDLoad games, so there's nothing else left to do. And once in this directory, which is the work games directory, just click a blank area, press the Amiga key and E to run a command, and then we want to type alha, which is the extractor, space x, space, and then the name of whichever game you want to extract, like so. So you can see now we've got the full name the same. Press enter, and this will extract the game. You only have to do this once, and once it's extracted, we just run the game. And once it's done, we close down, refresh by pressing the Amiga key and M. The new folder appears. We can now go into this. You only have to do the extract once and run the actual rough and tumble file. This will now launch the game, and that's it. That's all you have to do to run games. You don't need them on your floppy drive, you don't need to do anything else. You just simply double click the file and the games load. So that's it for this one. I think it's all ready to go back to the customer. I'll get this wrapped up, QC'd, and then on to the next.